Okay. I face to face. The first time in 2021. This is, of course, anthropology and human condition. So 2020 teaches us a lot about what it is to be human. We are beset by crisis. Killer wasps, bushfires, floods, COVID, locusts, visits from aliens from another planet. That's next. But we will not examine that until a few more weeks. We'll be finding out about, in the first few lectures, in the first few lectures, I'm talking about the old anthropology as a kind of background. But, you know, I think new anthropology is not much different, and we still have a lot to challenge. In some ways, the challenges of anthropology in the 1920s were more than today, when it is established and confident. Yet, I'm talking today about three old men. I'm now one of those middle-aged, not old. But I want to say in the beginning, the history of anthropology could not be what it is without the history of some important women. The wife of Sir James Fraser, the wife of Ronsard, and the many women in the life of the three that I'm going to talk about today. They, of course, are written out of the history, but I always want to remind you that happened. Nowadays, anthropology is more, but not perfectly, gender balanced. So that said, I'm going to talk about these three guys. George Bataille, Michel Leary, and Michael Tassi. Michael Tassi, George Bataille, Michel Leary. These two, Bataille and Leary, they are French anthropologists. Well, you know, at the start they weren't anthropologists, they were friends, and they were involved in art movements, and in going to parties, and going to brothels, and drinking, and all sorts of young men after the chaos of World War I, which was pretty significant for Europe. Because in Europe, the whole world and the idea of civilization had collapsed. Bataille himself spent for a long part of the war in a town called Reims, a kind of museum town, which was bombed for over 300 days consecutively by the Germans. His father was ill, could not leave the house. Everybody else fled the city. His father was ill, and Bataille had to look after him. Because he was like paralyzed in bed. Had to look after his nurse, help him with his toilet and his food. So his experience of the wars as a young boy was terrible. Leary, I don't know what he did in World War I. He was young, but he met with Bataille afterwards, and they were sort of on the periphery of an art movement called Dada. You know the history of art movements in Europe at all? You've done a course of that? I can't do it for you in a few minutes. Whole courses are done on that. So you know about, I think you know about the history of European painting, landscape painting, religious painting, portraiture, and so on. Then in the 19th century, Impressionism, Romanticism, Impressionism, Populism, Cézanne and all those, Manet and the order livings, feelings going into, and then afterwards, Cubism with Picasso. Bataille and Leray joined a movement called Dada, which after World War I, after the terrible experience, I mean, previously, Europeans, the French especially, but the English too, and the Germans, had thought they were kings of the world. They were the colonial power in so many places, the French here. And nothing could stand in the way of their forward development. They were, right? The English had come to India and destroyed the richest country on the planet at that time, within 200 years, 300 years, and were leading. So European civilization was proud of itself. That's why the early anthropologists like Fraser and Tyler as well, Fraser could sit at home and talk about the rest of the world as if he had the top prime position. But World War I showed Europeans as slaughtering each other. Civilization collapsed. They were in the muddy trenches just killing each other. And they were shown to the whole world that they were vulnerable, wrong, defeated, or able to be defeated, and somehow pathetic. And sensitive folks like Bataille and Leray had joined this movement of Dada, which was aimed to now, after World War I, there's nothing left of civilization. So there should be nothing left of all this art and the galleries, Dada, Dada. It was an expression of hostility and hatred to all that had come before. Or frustration. We're saying all of that stuff about creativity and civilization and so on, Dada, big deal. Look what it led to: World War I, destruction, death, killing, murder. Sort of a nothing. It didn't last for very long. And afterwards, Bataille and Leray joined with a guy called André Breton and a number of others in a movement called Surrealism. Has anyone heard of Surrealism before? Salvador Dali? Dali? Maybe you've seen a painting that has like watches that are melting in the desert. I should have brought a copy of that picture. I'll see if I can put one on the Google stream. I don't talk about Salvador Dali, but he's really interesting. There should be a whole lecture devoted to him. Can't do it. So, as it describes realism. Realism, you know what realism would be? It would be, if you're in painting and the movement was realism, that means if I paint you, I want to make the painting look as beautiful as you, exactly like you are, as realistic and perfect, or of you. Or of the class, then realism would be like conventional photography is realist. Of course, I've said to you before, photography is not real. The photograph that you have on your card is not you. It's a shrunken version of you. It's a very fat version of you. Right? But we take it as that's what you really are. So Surrealism was a movement after Dada. If Dada said, nah, nothing, Surrealism looked for something more than this world of illusion, called reality. We look for super reality. To get above or beyond or past reality, to understand really what reality was. And reality meant delving into worlds behind the image. So I'm using Michael Tausig, my friend Michael Tausig. He's not French, he's Australian actually, and he teaches in New York at Columbia University. Because I think Tausig is a really good way into talking about the Surrealists. He's a more contemporary writer. I mean, he's still writing books now, but he's quite elderly. Yeah, he's middle-aged, 77 or something. You sometimes see newspapers talk about him as a rock and roll professor, being young and energetic, looking, and we got a picture of him, don't we? Yeah? Colourful shirts and so on. But he's been working in Colombia for many years. And his first book was 40 years ago, The Devil and Commodity Fetishes. Right, so I want to talk about this and link it to some things we know. His fieldwork was in Columbia. He taught in Columbia University, but his fieldwork was in Colombia, the country. That's Colombia spelled Colombia. And it's in South America. So there's America, North America, sorry, Trump land, Trumpo. And then there's South America, Colombia is sort of there. On the Pacific coast. And he has been doing field work for at least 35 years. Remember we talked about 1 year of field work and we talked about Malinowski in 4 years back and forth a bit. 4 years of field work. Tausig has been going to the same places in Colombia for 35 years. But he kind of really knows his field area. But his first book was when he did his most intensive period of field work, and he did it with miners, working in mines. But Colombia is, a lot of it is forest, tropical forest. Now, actually, a lot of it is palm. You know, date palm, oil palm. You farm palm in the tropics, especially for commercial reasons, but that's now taking over the jungle. But previously, it was largely like Amazon jungle. Not all the Amazon, but. And within this area, explorers and prospectors had found gold, tin, copper, and there were huge mines opening up. And local people were employed in the mines. And Tausig, in the tradition of anthropology of labor, went to study the people who worked in the mines, like a good Marxist anthropologist should, right? And so he goes to Colombia to study in the mines, study the people, and discovers through his fieldwork that the people have a quite good understanding of their economy, but there's something else that's really anthropological that he gets a good take on, and that's their beliefs that the devil, Diablo, English for the devil, so the devil is a part of the economic system. So in a way, you've got Anthropologists are interested in economy, but in a way, bigger than economy for them is exchange. Because exchange systems. So last week, remember we were talking about Malinowski and the cooler. The cooler was the circuit of journeys made by the Surrealists, and they would exchange shells and necklaces with their other trading partners. But it would be a gift for the exchange of these shells. I give you this famous fantastic shell. You give me this necklace that used to belong to the market. And because we've done that symbolic exchange, which is powerful and meaningful in our culture, then, okay, I've also got all these yams and I was hoping for those accents or something. Right? So normal commodity trade would happen underneath this more powerful symbolic exchange. There wasn't economic. Yeah, it was economic, but somehow it was like, the reality was just an economic exchange. But behind it, there was a more systematic and powerful symbolic domain. Now in Colombia, the exchange between the employers who ran the mine and the workers was understood by the workers as you go to work to get a wage. You go to work to dig, find gold or copper minerals or whatever in order to get a wage. So, but at the same time, they believed that you had to get your wage regular. Make sure the wage was money that would go into your pocket and help your family. Or to do good work. You didn't just need skill digging and finding gold, you need to have made a good deal with the devil. Because money is the devil. Money was the devil. It had this, like, completely understood symbolic value for exchange. You pay your money and you get an object. But to make it work, and you should have done a good deal with the devil, or if somebody is making it work better than you, if they're saving better, or they're finding more gold, they've obviously done a better deal with the devil than you. So they had this belief system, this set of beliefs around this other world that was behind the world on the surface. Now, this too is like, Dowsing calls it the devil and commodity fetishism, because he's taking it from Das Kapital, Volume 1, Chapter 1, the idea of commodity fetish, where Marx at the end says, yes, we have the market, and in the market, what is the commodity fetish in Marx? It's money, the market, and the relationship between different commodities. In the market, I can buy this phone for $1 million or whatever, or I can buy this TV for the same money, or I can buy 7,000 apples or something like that. For the same symbolic. So money is the general equivalent. Marx that allows us to measure between all these different products. And we think about them as being related to each other through that system. But I'm just trying to say that actually what that is, what that object and the apples and the television, what these represent is the creativity of human beings, the labor of human beings. And instead of seeing that for what it really is, we see it in this surface level of value through the number system of money. Money is just another commodity. So it's got this magic power. and power over us, because it means that those things that we made are not ours. They are taken from us by the system in life. And that's commodity fetishism. So, Tausig, I think, is a good way into the Thai and the read, because that allows us to make sense of how their intense commitment to economic questions also raise these questions of the other world, the behind world, the underworld, or the world of, in Tausig's case, of the devil or religion, religious beliefs or monsters, or how with the Trobrianders, the symbolism of these gifts was this other layer of meaning on the top of the economic. Or think of how when you go about your everyday practice, you know how everything's going on, but you also have this other world of the ancestors, or there are spirits, or even if you don't believe in any of that, luck, or bad luck, or we even say, karma. You do that bad thing, it will come back to get you, come back and bite you. You talk in class, eventually it will come again back and bite you. We have a kind of, this world, obvious appearance world, and then another layer of relations behind that, so to speak. And they are like fetish sites, so they are put into these, they seem not real to the rational mind. They are very effective, very real. Another. Now, it could be the dead, the devil, or a hidden underworld that was especially important because remember they were mining in Colombia, so they were going underground, the world of the devil and the underworld. If you go into the underworld, if you haven't done a deal with the devil, you risk death. Or something. It's a way of explaining accidents as well. And we see that actually with Evan's Pritchard work next week in Africa. But here, it's also interesting because with Matai and Marie, they are trying to find this other world, and they try any way they can to get beyond the rational, beyond the appearance. So they go in for psychoanalytic techniques, psychology, but they also play around with going beyond logic, going beyond civilized behavior to extreme behavior. And they're especially interested in Thai, especially his early writing was quite pornographic, looking at how bodily excess can operate. And he has this book, Sex and Strange Behavior. It's called The Story of the Eye. It's really quite shocking. Sex and eggs. And I'm not going to describe it for you. You can go and find the book yourself. It's online. Sex and balls and eggs. Very juicy stuff. But Tausig is spends his career following this surrealist tradition of trying to see what is really going on behind the appearance of things. So when he meets what we call in the common practice witch doctor, he wants to understand shamanism. I can illustrate how these things are kind of part of popular culture. With language. Are you a language learner? Some of you are still learning English, right? And I'm learning Tibet, right? And you don't need to learn grammar, but I do for Tibet. I'm guessing you don't know Tibet grammar. You just know Tibet, right? Like I know English, but I don't know English grammar. I can tell you what a verb is and a noun is, but that's about it. An adverb? I don't know. I don't need to know. I know what's right. But You see, language has its appearance and then it has grammar behind it. It's the other level. But that's not the only one. And the witch doctor thing reminded me of something, a good illustration. Another thing behind the everyday reality of language is that you can speak Tingye, and it's smooth and easy for you. But I try and do it, and it hurts my jaw. Because I'm using muscles for some sounds, not all, that I'm not used to. And you've been doing it since you're young, you're completely used to it. And the same for English. If you want your pronunciation to be good in English, you need to make your mouth muscles do things that you're not used to yet. And you have to practice them. So, outside of the lecture, we're going to do some practice for that. And it's to do with the witch doctor. You know the song, My Old Man's a Witch Doctor? Okay, it's good practice for your jaw. My old man's a witch doctor. He told me what to do. My old man's a witch doctor. He told me what to say. He said, ooh, ee, ooh, ah, ah, ching, chang, walla, bing, bang. Ooh, ee, ooh, ah, ah, ching, chang, walla, bing, bang. You can say that fast, you'll have a sore mouth, right? And it's good practice. But these kind of things, right? Can you do it? Ready? Ooh, ee, ooh, ah, ah, ching, chang, walla, walla, bing, bang. Ooh, ee, ooh, ah, ah, ching, chang, walla, walla, bing, bang. Ooh, ee, ooh, ah, ah, ching, chang, walla, walla, bing, bang. Come on. Ooh, ee, ooh, ah, ah, ching, chang, walla, walla, bing, bang. All right. Some of you probably know a bit like that. 7 silvery swans swam silently seaward. Because S is hard to form. 7 silver swans swam silently seaward. Or see, she sells seashell. She sells seashell by the seashore. The shell sea. She sells seashells by the seashore. The shell seashell. I can't do it. I did it better in the morning class when I had more coffee. All right, but you see how there's language, and then there's a behind language that we know, which is called grammar. But even there's another kind of behind language, which is embodied. Like it's not even the psychology or the nervous system, it's your actual muscles that are also part of the reality. So surrealism would be getting to that reality, that over reality, over the obvious, into the hyper, super, reality. So anyway, Tarsik is the guy who helps us get into this because his career was working out these concepts like fetishism. We got some translation week. Fetishism, I already said this, chapter 1 of chapter. Much debated in anthropology, but also fetishism in Freud, in psychoanalysis. How to explain that, okay? In popular culture, but also kind of Freudian thing. Have you heard about a foot fetishist? What is a foot fetish? Have you heard that phrase? Okay, a foot fetishist is a man who really gets excited by seeing girls' ankles. Right? Phenomenon. I don't think it happens to everyone, but and maybe it happens less now because we have pornography and so on. But in the 19th century, to see a lady's ankles got men very excited, and it was called foot fetish. And Freud tried to understand this. And he said, well, what's really going on? Ankles aren't that interesting. Maybe they are interesting, but what's really going on? Instead, there's a displacement operation working with foot fetish. You're interested in the foot, You think foot's erotic is really because your mind cannot accept that you are interested in genitals. And you've displaced it to another object. In the same way that money is the displacement of labor. We displace it. I don't know if that's true or not. It seems crazy, but then Freud didn't start that. Tell me about your dreams, and they mean that you are really in love with your mother. That's psychoanalysis. Tell me about. The thing is, we can kind of explain what we're doing to ourselves, and now we have an idea. But psychoanalysis will say, yes, but behind that, what's really going on is your childhood trauma. You had a trauma when you were very young. Your mother stopped breastfeeding you when you were only 3 months old, or something like that. And that's causing your problems with attachment now. That's the kind of way psychoanalysis works through fetishism. Now, anthropologists were different to that again. So there's the Marxist one, the Freudian one. Anthropological version of the fetish was what I could find an African tribal leader, and to understand how that tribal leader has power. And it was through, I don't think I'll find it. No, it was through. Okay, the tribal leader will have a whisk. A kind of stick that you use to swat flies. Really, but it was a ceremonial stick with horse hair or zebra hair or something. And if you held that stick, you were the king. I guess the kings of Europe also had that. They had a thing called a scepter. I really should have these words translated into. And that is a fetish object because the tribals, they said the power of the king is in the object, not in the king. So the one who holds the object has the power to rule the kingdom. I mean, European kings also had that. They knew that the king was the one in power, but they also talked about the crowned heads of Europe. So just their head, in fact, just their crown is what made them into king or queen. They are like a symbol. So a fetish is like a symbol, but a fetish is really is the power. So the person who sat on the special stool, like a throne, I suppose, of the tribal leader was the one who was in power. And if somebody else could get that stool and sit on it, they could make the decision. So the stool had the power. But it was fetish because really people had power. But it was like for the community to understand, and it was a displacement. So it facilitated change of power and so on. I guess, in a way, the office of the chairman or chairperson of a committee, or the president of the university, or something like that, they can also have that kind of symbolic power. The person who is in that position is the one, not the person themselves, but the chair. And we call professorship, right? We call it a chair, a professorial chair. You sit in the chair. It's not that you are the one with the professors. It's like you're being elected to sit in that post. So you have that status. Our society is full of this. So the anthropological notion of fetish is really strong. But Towsey, in his field work, which went on for many years, he found it as really important for this Colombian mining society. And it was all about the devil and money. All right, but he went on, he did other great work, and I just want to recommend to you his book, My Cocaine Museum, because it's great. He looks at how the cocaine economy in South America displaced mining, but is now being displaced again by pound. Really interesting economic study because we went from a colonial economy to an illegal parental drug use economy to now international neoliberal but legitimate, even though it's destroying the environment. So his analyses are really quite powerful, but because he's looking at the reality behind the reality. He keeps on doing this in all of his work. As I said, he's been doing field work for 35 years, so he works on many topics. Shamanism, mimesis. Mimesis is, I guess, symbolism. How these symbols like the crown and the chair and so on. Memory and mimesis. The meanings come together. He worked on museums, my cocaine museum. What is it that gets put into the museum and remembered, and what doesn't? In that book, he starts by going into the bank in Colombia, and inside the bank there's a museum of money, or a museum of wealth, and it includes lots of gold, gold from the Inca times, beautifully worked images of these Inca civilization gold treasures. Well, that's from 500 years ago. The Spanish came and wiped them out. There's been gold mining from then until now, but none of that gets into the museum. Why? Why is the museum only about that old stuff? What about the blacks that are doing gold mining now? What about the way in which this economy has continued from the Incas to modern times? And then he also said, well, why, if the bank is about wealth, why doesn't it include cocaine? Because that was the huge, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, huge economy in Colombia was the cocaine cartels. And they were richer than the Incas. And now it's other things, digital, technological. Why are they not in the museum? So really interesting questions he asks about what is the reality. Then he writes about color. I mean, he's got a couple of different books, one on the color purple and its power, and really interested in blue and green and blue. Okay, so indigo. You can only see it's represented one pair of genes. Anyone else wearing genes? There's two. So you know where the blue color of indigo is history. It comes from colonial times. That the British, while they were investing in opium, they also invested in the production of blue dye indigo cloth. And that blue dye indigo cloth was used to buy slaves in Africa. Because that blue cloth was valued, which took their slaves to America, which made the cotton, which was then dyed blue again by the British. And eventually, in the gold trade, came up with Levi jeans. Not the Levi-Straussian colleges, a different kind of Levi-Strauss. So he writes about that blue-colored cloth and its history, and how everyone in America was doing flips and twists to get into a pair of American blue jeans, right? It became part of the culture. It had this hidden history of colonial economy and slavery. As does all cotton. Well, actually, this is not cotton. Maybe it's half cotton, it's half bamboo. But that also has a history. Exoticism, but also not so sweaty. Anyway, by the by, he also wrote on diaries. So he's the one who brought this one to my attention first. But this is like in the diary form, 5th of April. Today is tomorrow. We have to go and get some elephants. We drive for 3 hours. It's boring. It feels like we've been driving for 50 years. I can't remember having seen this road at all before. They promised us elephants. We don't know which way to go. It's orderly. The elephants have gone back up the hill. They won't come down again until tomorrow. We must be patient. Boring. This evening we'll eat dinner with the captain and talk at great length about the elephants. Meanwhile, let us clear up yesterday's problem. So like a diary where he just puts down his thoughts, and that was published as ethnography. Tausig kind of says the diary is more true. Malinowski's diary was published as well in 1967. In 1922, Malinowski put out his work on the Kula, the first volume anyway, I'm not going to be specific, and it was carefully edited and coherent. The messy world of the Trojans was made into a good story. The diary gets us back to the messiness, the impressions, and the fact that his understanding of children is filtered through literature and self-abuse and all sorts. So his stuff on diary is very interesting. And even, I won't go into this, his stuff on drawing little pictures in your diary. He did a whole book on that. Because he's fascinated with Walter Benjamin. Franco Bertone and Franco Bertone. This great book of Walter Benjamin, The Arcades, was given to Bataille for safekeeping at the beginning, in the early years of World War II. So Bataille, here he is. I want to say, this is a nice photograph. Does he look like a really nice guy? He's got an arrow in his head, sorry. Or fella. Now here's an illustration of how a real photograph doesn't really tell you inside his mind. There's a lot going on. This looks like a man in a library, because he was a librarian. He worked in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. He was in charge of maps and coins. But he was also, after work, he was often late for work, often closed up early to go to pubs and bars and brothels with the ring. And he published a lot of very strange journals. The journal Documents, where they published a lot of surrealist material. He argued with Breton. He said very rude things about Breton. I have nothing much to say about the personality of André Breton. His police reports do not interest me. Breton, he says, Breton was trying to control the art movement of surrealism by saying who should do what and who should be, like he wanted to be the head. And Bataille, of course, was maybe just jealous. Maybe he's just jealous. But he wanted to say we shouldn't have any. And that's part of the problem. With his art movements, they have a leader. We should not have a leader. Let's be more and not free. And he has obstructed the pavement with his idiocies. Religion should die with its religious feedback. A swollen abscess of clerical phraseology. He's castrated people in their dreams. Castrated? Instead of the head being chopped off, the penis being chopped off. They've taken away the possibility of joy. He also uses obscene or bodily metaphor to try and get you to think outside the normal, outside the polite, and outside the conventions and controlling conventions of civilism, civilized society, polite society, and bourgeois society. He wanted to get young people to rise up against the bourgeois family. Right? So he writes this book, The Story of the Eye. I already mentioned it. Published anonymously, but very pornographic. Blue of Moon, which is a better, more interesting book about going to Spain. A sort of field-work book. Also a bit pornographic, but his really big work that's important is not this kind of play, porn, extreme stuff, but his work on expenditure and on economy and exchange. And it's a couple of articles and a book The Uses of Expenditure in 1933, and the Accursed Share. The Accursed Share in, well, after World War II, it was written in the early year of the first year of the war. The part more deep, the Accursed Share. The part of, right, from your study of Pragmatic, we know, right, that every worker produces more value than that worker needs to reproduce themselves. And that surplus is appropriated by the bosses. Or in communism, we use the surplus for the upkeep of all. We reinvest it and we look after the sick and young and children and so on. Ideally, try. But I wanted to analyze how that structure worked in all societies. And he said this is the real problem of all societies, is what to do with that surplus. And that is kind of previously always been cursed, because those that were in power always wanted to grab it for themselves rather than share it. And it led them to extravagant either excess or destruction. Sometimes it led to creative acts of beauty, say in the Italian Renaissance, where the surplus was used to keep artists alive. Some, of course, there were still people whose surplus was just expropriated by the bosses. The family Borgia was viciously exploited, but they supported Leonardo, so many in Florence. And so his work on the accursed share is what should we say about the accursed share? The only thing that I could think of that was an image that could explain the idea of producing, spending, or giving without expecting something back in return was the sun. The sun gives energy, but it doesn't expect anything back. It doesn't consume anything, it doesn't demand anything. If I give you a gift, even if you don't give me a gift back later, which you should, I still get the feeling of, again, a good feeling, right? Which I can abuse. I can tell people about. There's no such thing as a gift that doesn't demand a return, or get some kind of return. Even if you don't actually get anything physical back, you get the feeling of it. Right? So the general economy for him is that only the sun has found a way to just always give. That's like spiritual or something. But it has an ethics. So there's a general economy and a restricted economy. The restricted economy is realist economy. The economy we understand every day. But the expanded economy is one where we think of what to do with that excess energy. If you are a tiger, for example, and you want to eat that, what's the tiger say? Sheep, antelope, a buck or something. The tiger doesn't just grab it. It uses all its massive energy. In fact, inside the body of a tiger, there's too much energy, more energy than it needs. And so when it runs down and catches a baby deer, Bambi, right? It uses so much energy that it didn't need to use, it expends all that energy. And it has to sit and rest and so on. So that's the general economy. The restricted economy is one where you think, well, how much do I need to spend to get that from? I'm never spending too much. Being very conscious of expenditure in gambling is a psychological problem for us. So we have this restricted economy and the idea of the unrestricted economy. In the unrestricted economy, I would give you a book, well, you wouldn't even, a book would appear. I wouldn't give it to you, you wouldn't know. And I wouldn't even know. The book would appear. For there to be no exchange investment. See, there can't be a gift. There's no such thing. This is Marcel Mauss and there's no such thing as a gift, really. A gift is always a counter gift. I give you a book, I expect the base to smile, to give me back something, right? The mask has completely destroyed civilization, I swear. He's aiming to use, and this is what Tarski says is a great contribution to social theory, is use the idea of expenditure to then build an ethical, what should we do with the surplus? What should we do with surplus? We should give without return. Oh, this is the thing about using more energy than is needed to maintain life. Now, if you have that energy, think about our societies as like the tiger in space. The tiger in space has too much energy for that space. The energy has to go somewhere. It has to be expended, and it's expended uselessly. Actually, and it gets all into all sorts of sexual stuff as well. The tiger in space is like sex in time. It's like intense expenditure. Intensify. And so he builds an ethics on this. He says you should intensify experience because we have this energy. And if you don't use it, well, it's just going to lead to, it's going to be wasted. So it can be wasted either beautifully, gloriously, in art, in good work, in effort, in glory, or at the time he was writing and he was warning, or it can be used, it can be destroyed, capitalism and war. Production for production's sake, wealth for wealth's sake, war for war's sake. And he was very ethical in that sense. He was against accumulating what you take, not giving back. And he thought we were losing dignity because we were allowing accumulation to build up and up and up to the point where it came to a crisis. And if it builds up and up and up, the crisis, we need to find even more graphic ways to consume our excess. So society becomes decadent. The bourgeois rich start to live excessively. They buy fast sports cars and take piles of cocaine and drink champagne or light their cigarettes with $100 bill. Right? The famous Wolf of Wall Street thing. Lighting your cigarette with $100 bill, just waste. Or massive amounts of plastic, or selling water, or the decadence of our societies is that we haven't found ways to use our excess creative energy for the good of everyone in ways that are worthwhile. And instead we use them in building up war. Why has America been at war for 80 years, non-stop, since World War II? Because they learned that a war is a good way of burning off that excess decadence. So it invests more in the armaments industry, which it then has to consume, than it does in education by 10, 20, 100-fold. So he's against accumulation and, he's against war. So the war was coming before Bataille. It was World War II. He's writing this on the eve of World War II. Wasn't published until afterwards. He was older by the time. He wasn't able to fight. France was defeated very quickly in World War II, although there was a resistance led by his friend Louis Aragon. His poetry I recommend that you look up. I read his poetry just 2 weeks ago, his World War II poetry, and it's fantastic, and it speaks to the current period. Like, it's poetry that tries to mobilize the people for a fight against America, Germany, the enemy. You see that script was intentional against America. And it really makes sense now to read it as well with Trump, and Trumpism is crazily dominant. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to talk about Surrealism, and then I'll come back and talk about it. So excuse a little bit of jumping forward. I want to we're going to talk about the Cephala society and the headless society. And I want to talk about automatic writing and get you to do an exercise before we have a break. So you need pen and paper, a page each, page of paper, and a pen, please. And you get out one page and piece of paper. A piece of paper. Anything yet? Or anything hand? You don't have to hand it in. I want you to take a pen and fight against control. Maybe you can translate. Against control. The mind will try, you will try and edit your writing as you're writing it down. Try not to. Just write what is in your head. Just write what is in your head. Do not edit. Do not try and manage it. Just see what is in your head. Just write it down. That will be more real. That will be the surrealists. They thought that was a way to really get towards real thinking. Not controlled and cleaned up thinking. So now it might be that you just write boring. It means your mind is boring. That's okay. Or I'm boring. I can leave it doesn't matter. Keep it, okay. You will not have to read it out. It's just for you. But write without stopping, without thinking. Just write what's in your head. Blue, cigarette, I don't know, whatever. Boyfriend, girlfriend. Lunch. What you had for lunch. Your itchy back. Just write for 5 minutes without stopping. Go. Okay, so that's the exercise. And I'm going to stop the recording for this part and start again later. Okay.